As the fire crackles and shadows dance on the walls, we journey back in time to the very roots of Halloween, where the veil between the living and the dead is said to thin, and restless spirits wander the earth. From ancient rituals to haunted traditions, the origins of this chilling night are steeped in dark legends. Join me by the fireside as we uncover the haunting stories that gave rise to Halloween. Long before Halloween as we know it, the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain marked the turning of the seasons. Celebrated on the night of October 31st, Samhain signalled the end of the harvest and the beginning of the cold, dark winter. It was believed that on this night the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, allowing spirits to pass freely into the world of the living. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the Celts believed that the darkness held great power. The spirits of the dead, both benevolent and malevolent, were thought to wander freely among the living. Some were welcomed home by their families with offerings of food and drink, but others, the vengeful and restless, were feared. Bonfires were lit on hilltops to ward off evil spirits. These fires were considered sacred, and each household would extinguish its hearth fire, lighting a new flame from the great communal bonfires to bring protection through the dark months ahead. The flames were believed to have purifying properties, cleansing the land of evil and protecting the people from harm. But it wasn't only the spirits of the dead that roamed on Samhain. Dark figures, known as the Aios Shi, supernatural beings from the otherworld, were said to cross into our world on this night. These beings, also called the fair folk or fairies, were not the whimsical creatures of modern tales. They were capricious and dangerous, capable of bringing fortune or ruin. Villagers disguised themselves in animal skins and masks, hoping to confuse the Aios Shi and avoid their wrath. Celtic priests known as Druids played a central role in the Samhain rituals. They were said to have the power to communicate with the spirits and to foresee the future. The night of Samhain was one of prophecy, where divination was practiced widely. In the flicker of the firelight, the Druids would cast omens, reading the future in the bones of sacrificed animals or in the patterns of the flames themselves. But these prophecies were not always comforting, for Samhain also marked a time of great uncertainty, a time when death was near and the survival of the winter was never guaranteed. In some regions, burial mounds were seen as portals to the other world, and on Samhain night, these mounds were said to open, allowing the spirits of the dead and the Aios Shi to travel freely between worlds. These sites, like the Hill of Tara and Newgrange, were places of great reverence and fear. Even today they hold an aura of mystery, especially on Samhain night. Yet for all the fear and reverence surrounding the dead, Samhain was also a time of celebration. The harvest had been gathered, and the people feasted in honour of their ancestors and in preparation for the dark months ahead. The Feast of Samhain was a communal affair, where stories were shared, songs were sung, and offerings were made to the gods and the dead. But no matter how grand the feast, the dark truth of the night lingered. Despite the bonfires, the disguises and the offerings, no one could truly escape the wandering dead on Samhain. The boundary between the living and the dead was fragile, and for one night the spirits of the past walked freely among the living. As Samhain evolved, so too did the stories of ghosts, dark omens, and eerie superstitions that crept into the hearts of those who dared to walk the roads at night. It was said that on this night, the veil between the worlds was so thin that spirits could not only walk among the living, but could also enter homes, follow people, and cause mischief, or worse. To protect themselves, families would place offerings of food and drink on their doorsteps to appease the wandering souls. These offerings were known as soul cakes in later traditions, small round cakes left to satisfy the spirits and prevent them from bringing misfortune upon the household. But there were many more ways to keep the dead at bay. In the countryside, people would carve turnips into grotesque faces, lit by candles, believing that these eerie lanterns would scare away evil spirits. This tradition of protecting oneself from the dead by carving faces into vegetables would eventually evolve into the modern-day jack-o'-lantern. Yet it wasn't only the spirits of the dead that were feared. The night was filled with omens, some of which foretold the future, while others were seen as warnings of doom. Apples, in particular, held a strong connection to the supernatural during Samhain. Bobbing for apples A game that we still know today was once a form of divination. Young people would compete to bite into an apple in a bowl of water, believing that the first to catch one would be the next to marry. But the tradition went deeper than that. In some areas, it was believed that the peel of an apple, when thrown over the shoulder, could reveal the initials of a future spouse. And then there were the more sinister omens. If the wind blew out a candle in your window, it was said that a spirit had entered your home. If a black dog crossed your path on Samhain night, it was considered a death omen, a warning that someone in your household might not survive the coming winter. Even the howling of the wind was interpreted as the cries of the restless dead seeking vengeance or release. Across the British Isles, different regions held their own ghost stories and superstitions that thrived around Samhain. In Scotland, it was said that on this night, the gates of fairy mounds would open, allowing the Aos, She and fairies to travel freely. These fairies were feared for their capricious nature, and those who ventured too close to the mounds on Samhain risked being taken to the other world, never to return. It was common practice to leave gifts of milk or bread near these mounds, hoping to appease the fairies and ensure safe passage through the night. In Wales, the concept of cae hiraeth, a ghostly wailing sound, was associated with Samhain. The wail was believed to be a warning of death, a spectral cry heard by those who were doomed to die within the year. Those who heard the cae hiraeth would prepare themselves for what was to come, but no matter how hard they tried, they could never outrun their fate. The night was not just filled with ghost stories, but also with bizarre happenings. Livestock was known to go missing or be found dead under mysterious circumstances, and crops left in the fields were said to rot overnight. These strange events were often blamed on spirits or mischievous fairies, who would cause trouble for those who had angered them during the year. People also used the night of Samhain to communicate with their ancestors. A place at the dinner table was often left empty for a loved one who had passed, inviting their spirit to join in the feast. Candles were placed in windows to guide these spirits home, but they were never to be extinguished, as doing so might anger the dead. But even with these rituals, no one was truly safe. As the night wore on, shadows took on a life of their own. In the flicker of a candle or the glow of the dying fire, figures seemed to move in the corners of the room. The wind howled through cracks in the walls, carrying with it whispers of long-dead voices. And in the distance, footsteps echoed on empty roads, yet no one was there. These were the moments when people truly felt the presence of the dead. Some even believed that if you looked into a mirror on Samhain night, you might catch a glimpse of your own death or the face of a loved one who had passed away. This practice, known as mirror divination, was feared for its ability to show terrible visions, and few dared to try it. From the shadows that danced in the candlelight to the whispers that filled the air, Samhain night was a time when the natural and supernatural collided. Superstition, fear, and the presence of the dead were woven into every moment, leaving the living to wonder what might be lurking just beyond their doors. As the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain spread across the British Isles, it began to evolve under the influence of Christianity. By the 9th century, Samhain had merged with a new observance, All Hallows Eve, the night before All Saints' Day. This Christian celebration held on November 1st honoured the saints, martyrs and the dead. Yet, even as Christian beliefs took hold, the old traditions of Samhain lingered, blending with the new in strange and unsettling ways. On All Hallows Eve, the living prayed for the souls of the departed, but they also feared them. It was still believed that the spirits of the dead wandered the earth on this night. The customs of lighting bonfires and leaving offerings for the dead continued, but now, instead of appeasing pagan gods or fairies, the people hoped to protect their homes from restless souls. Churches held vigils for the dead, but outside the church walls, the old superstitions persisted. In many parts of Britain, it was common to visit graveyards on All Hallows Eve to light candles in memory of the dead. This act, known as souling, was not only a way to honour the departed, but also a protective measure. It was thought that by lighting candles, the living could guide lost souls safely to the afterlife. preventing them from lingering and causing harm. In some regions, children and the poor would go door to door, singing prayers for the dead in exchange for soul cakes, small round cakes baked to honour the deceased. This practice was the precursor to modern trick-or-treating, though it carried a much darker tone. The prayers offered by the living were said to lessen the time the souls of the dead spent in purgatory, and to refuse these offerings was to risk angering the spirits. The blending of Samhain and All Hallows Eve was not always smooth. Some in the church viewed the lingering pagan rituals as dangerous, even heretical. The fear of witches, ghosts, and the supernatural grew alongside the Christian beliefs about heaven and hell. In medieval Britain, it was believed that witches were particularly powerful on All Hallows Eve. They were said to gather in covens, practicing dark magic and making pacts with the devil. On this night, their spells were stronger, their curses more deadly. It was not uncommon for villagers to seek protection from witches by carrying iron or wearing charms to ward off evil. The fear of witchcraft would later fuel the infamous witch hunts that swept across Europe, including the trials in Britain where accused witches were put to death for their supposed crimes. As centuries passed, the focus of All Hallows Eve began to shift. The church encouraged the people to focus on the saints and the holy dead, but many could not shake the feeling that the spirits of their ancestors and darker beings still walked among them. Stories of ghostly apparitions and haunted places continued to spread. In parts of England and Scotland, people began to carve grotesque faces into turnips and place them in windows to scare away evil spirits. These carved vegetables were meant to protect homes from the souls of the damned or malicious fairies still wandering the earth on All Hallows Eve. This practice would eventually evolve into the pumpkin carving tradition we know today. In Ireland, the story of Jack, a man doomed to roam the earth with a lantern carved from a turnip, became a key part of All Hallows Eve folklore. Jack's tale, a warning about the consequences of tricking the devil, was told around hearths and passed down through generations. As Irish immigrants brought this tradition to America, it transformed into the jack-o'-lantern, with pumpkins replacing turnips as the preferred carving material. The fear of the dead walking the earth never fully disappeared. In some parts of Wales it was believed that the dead gathered together on All Hallows Eve, forming spectral processions known as the Toily. These ghostly parades were said to march through villages, led by the spirits of those who'd recently died. To see a toily was an ill omen, often predicting that someone in the village would soon pass away. The chilling sound of the toily's march, with rattling chains and ghostly cries, haunted those who dared to stay outdoors after dark on this eerie night. By the 19th century, All Hallows Eve had transformed into the Halloween we recognise today. Yet even with costumes, games and sweets, the festival still retained echoes of its dark past. The bonfires, which once burned to protect villages from the wandering dead, became part of the celebration, with people gathering around fires to tell ghost stories late into the night. The ancient fears of Samhain, the spirits of the dead, and the malevolent forces of the otherworld still lingered just beneath the surface. Though the Christian Church tried to tame the festival, Halloween remains a night when the past meets the present, when the living and the dead walk side by side. The ancient fear of what lurks in the shadows, passed down through centuries of tradition, remains even now. Even today, Halloween remains a night of ghostly encounters and chilling traditions across the British Isles. Old legends tell of haunted places where spirits rise on Halloween night, leaving their resting places to walk among the living. From eerie whispers in ancient cemeteries to poltergeists slamming doors, Halloween is still believed to be a time when the dead are closest to us. One of the most haunted places tied to Halloween is Pluckley in Kent, often called England's most haunted village. On Halloween, locals speak of the screaming woods where cries echo through the trees, thought to be the voices of those lost in the forest centuries ago. Shadowy figures are seen moving among the trees, vanishing as quickly as they appear. The ghost of the Red Lady is also said to haunt Pluckley's old churchyard, searching for her lost child. On Halloween night, Her glowing figure is seen wandering the graves, her presence sending chills through those who dare to visit. In Scotland, legends of haunted castles abound, particularly Glamis Castle, where the ghost of the Grey Lady is said to walk the halls. Thought to be the spirit of Lady Janet Douglas, wrongfully executed for witchcraft in 1537, her restless soul appears most strongly on Halloween. Even the seemingly innocent tradition of carving pumpkins has dark origins. Long before pumpkins, people across Britain carved turnips with grotesque faces to ward off evil spirits. But it was said that if the lanterns were left unattended or allowed to go out, they would attract spirits instead of repelling them. Many believe that these lanterns were meant to keep away creatures like the Dullahan, the headless horseman of Irish legend who rides on Halloween night searching for souls to take. Across Britain, from flickering lanterns to haunted woods, Halloween remains a time when the boundary between our world and the next is thin, and those who walk the streets after dark can never be sure what or who might be following them. As the fire begins to fade and the night settles in, remember that Halloween is much more than costumes and candy. It's a night when the boundary between the living and the dead grows perilously thin. The ancient traditions of Samhain, the ghostly tales, and the haunted rituals of our ancestors remind us that some things are never truly gone. Even now, as we carve our pumpkins and light our lanterns, we carry on these traditions. But do we really understand what they were meant to protect us from? Perhaps the spirits of Halloween past still walk among us, waiting for a moment when we forget and let our guard down. If you've enjoyed tonight's journey into the origins of Halloween, don't forget to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more eerie tales from Britain's haunted history. We release new stories every week, so hit the bell icon to make sure you never miss an episode. And as you head into Halloween, be careful. The stories we've shared tonight may just be more than legends. And when you hear that knock on your door or those footsteps behind you, will you dare to turn and look?